Hello, my name is Zoltan Rendes, and this is We Are Endangered Species, the first episode of this podcast. We had a busy year last year. It was the hottest year on record. We had an even busier January, which was the hottest January ever on record. But I'm going to turn to Balázs Just, my friend, who will tell us why we are endangered species today.
And today's reason we are an endangered species is numbers. Yeah, math's the thing I sucked at as a kid, but have grown to like it as a common denominator to measuring human stupidity. Like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to ignore me regurgitating numbers about the odds of your survival on a planet without necessary resources? I'd bet it's closer to 10 because it's so far away, but guess what? At the current rate, we'd need 3 Earths to sustain the population by 2050. That's 25 years from now, or the oldest girlfriend Leonardo DiCaprio ever had. And no, drifting away into the ocean and freezing to death won't be an option because, global warming. It took 200,000 years to reach the first billion in human population in the early 1800s. Then it took just 200 years to reach 8 billion. Half of all fossil energy and many other essential resources have been consumed in just the past 35 years. Energy is vital to grow other resources and the economy. While population grew by a factor of 7, energy consumption grew by 25 and real GDP by 100%. And people think this is normal, but it's actually an anomaly. If you look at the past 200,000 years of human history, and while we keep chasing growth, as if our livelihood depended on it, we are killing ourselves. It's a false assumption that our livelihood depends on growth. The measure of success is actually the opposite. It's reducing the use of resources because guess what? While human population has surpassed 8 billion, Earth hasn't grown. Not only are we using up the resources, we are contracting its abundance. It's a decrease in natural capital and overfilling natural waste sinks. We can't maintain even the current population at the present material waste. And as we near 10 billion, we'll accelerate the depletion of essential resources. This is the boom-bust cycle. If you introduce a species to a new habitat with no natural predators, humans, population will expand until it depletes natural resources. Then we get to negative feedback, overcrowding, diseases, competition, conflict. So the population crashes to a level at or below theoretical capacity. In other words, it goes extinct. European death rate is projected to climb 50% by the end of the century. But just like Pavlov's dogs, us humans can't be trained to care about rewards if they aren't imminent. So who cares if your grandchildren will suffocate? Let's drill, baby, drill. Now, I can't put a price on my survival or yours, but I know the tech oligarchs who cheered on as Trump withdrew the US from the Paris Climate Accord can. Their net worth topped $1 trillion. So you and I can keep sucking on the paper straws. We are not the ones destroying the world en masse. And that, guys and dolls, is today's reason we are an endangered species. Here to talk over the headlines and my obsession with numbers is the most fitting person we could think of. He is the BAFTA-nominated director of A Girl with a Pearl Earring, an eco-warrior who runs a Facebook group called Apocalypse A Go-Go. And I want to ask him about that, actually. And he's also the director of the 2015 documentary 10 Billion. Peter Weber is here with us.
Hello, how you doing?
Peter, before we even go elbow deep into this whole thing, I want to ask you, Apocalypse A Go-Go, it's on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So what do you make of the Zuckerberg and Trump and are you staying and continuing your climate fight on Facebook or what's the deal?
I mean, actually, I've been less engaged with that. Partly is to do with what you were saying, that you preach to the choir. It's really hard to convince people who either want to ignore it or don't engage with it. So that combined with Meta, with Zuckerberg, with the whole shit show, really. Is making me slowly check out. I don't know whether I'll move it to another platform, Substack or something, but no, less and less time on Facebook. And I suspect it will get even worse now, won't it? Now we're in the second Trump era.
It probably will, but you're the fact that you said you're preaching to the choir, that's interesting. The Oxford University and the Reuters Institute have conducted a study in eight countries: UK, US, Brazil, France, India, Japan, Pakistan, Germany. And they have come to the conclusion that climate perception inertia is where we're at. The numbers are globally that 50% people are aware of the fact that we have a climate crisis. They are even concerned about it, but they don't do anything. And in fact, if you want to get even more scared, this number has actually dropped 1% over the past 2 years.
Also, another worldwide study shows that 1 out of 5 people still think that climate change is a hoax. 1.6 billion people we are talking about. So, what do you think about those numbers and the media adoption of climate change?
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of terrifying, really. It just goes to show how humans as a species, well, really are an endangered species, as you both posited, because they're even the people who do engage with climate change, who do actually believe it as a scientific fact, are not changing their behavior that much. You know, people are flying as much as they did beforehand, consuming as much as they did beforehand, apart from a relatively small amount of people. So, for me, I've always thought it has to be policy that changes. I mean, we do want things to be more bottom up than top down, but I can't see any other way to do it than through regulations. And obviously, people of a certain political bent, right of centre, hate regulations, hate an over-regulated economy. So it's not in their political interest to believe it. So we're really in a difficult place, and sadly, I can't see at the moment how we're going to be able to improve that position.
Peter, I totally agree with you, and I'm preaching the same to people. And Balázs referenced this research. The same research says that actually the people who are concerned about climate change expect politicians and organizations to do the least against the climate, to mitigate the effects of climate change. And I'm a big fan of the bottom-up approach, but it seems like the top-down is closing down on the bottom-up approach. So do you see that now in the world? Because like January
Yes.
for me was the worst month for climate change so far.
Well, you see it not only with, let's say in the States where, they've taken a disastrous turn, I think, but even in the UK at the moment, where there's a slightly left of centre government that had quite firm green targets, but now they're actually in government. Now that they've won the recent election, they seem to be watering them down. They're going to approve the third runway at Heathrow. There's a chance they might approve this new oil field. Because the election cycle is in the UK, it's like 5 years. So we have very short-term governments who really have to worry about the immediate future. They're scared of their electorates, certainly in the UK, if not elsewhere, we see it in America, are increasingly volatile. So it's like a perfect storm, and maybe it will take the next generation, or maybe it will take an increase in the ferocity of weather patterns and the rest of it before people actually sit up and take notice. But at the moment, we seem like ostriches.
You're saying next generation, if we get there.
If we get
you're
there.
bringing the UK up. The Met Office in the UK estimates that by 2070, the winters will be 4.5 degrees warmer in the UK and 30% wetter, and summers will be 6 degrees warmer and 60% drier. And that's that next generation that you're talking about.
I would add one fact to that like why we are waiting for 1.5 Celsius degrees threshold for 2030, which we actually speeded over. What's the use of these targets anymore? Like, who would take UN seriously? Who would take a new UN target seriously after this? Like, we sped through, and it's however I look at my watch, it's 2025. We still have 5 years to like go deep into the beyond 1.5 Celsius era.
It's hard not to be really, really scared. I can't remember who said this quote. There's a quote: "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism." And I think at the moment people aren't prepared to make the adjustments to their lifestyle, to the economic system, and there is a kind of inertia. There's business as usual. It's like trying to turn a super tanker around. And that's why we are looking, I think, at a very, very potentially very, very scary future, and also the thing is, it may get hotter in the UK, but what if the Gulf Stream, which is weakening at the moment because of climate change, I mean, that would throw things into complete chaos, So there's so many tipping points we're not aware of, once the permafrost starts melting, once you get methane in the atmosphere, so on and so forth, that, everyone thinks it's going to be smooth like that, but there could be some very nasty surprises.
And like you said, that people have an easier time preparing and imagining the end of the world versus the end of capitalism. It's all these doomsdayers and the guys who dig whatever bunkers in the ground, and they prepare for the worst, and they're serious about it on National Geographic. And yet people, the one thing they will not do is the one thing they should do, which is reduce consumption. And the paper straws are one thing, but dude, you don't have to travel for a vacation every second weekend.
You don't have to use your private plane to go to bathroom, because there is that bathroom in Rome which you really liked. So
Well, exactly. And if you look at the way that, emissions, for example, you look at the emissions put out by the very top percentile of very rich Americans, whether they be billionaires or whether they be Kardashians or Taylor Swift, even in her private jet, there's a very few people who are using a lot of resources compared to, I don't know, let's say a Tuareg out of the Sahel or something, who will have a very small climate profile. So it's there's no equity in there. And also, there are countries that would like to catch up to where we are at the moment. And I think it's, that there's a big moral conundrum there as well, because we've chucked out, we being the West, the developed world, have chucked out so much carbon dioxide that it leaves precious little breathing space for developing countries. So it is an enormous, complex, difficult problem. And because of the disinformation that comes from big oil, from and in this case from the US government, it means that people are incentivized not to believe, because that way they just say, oh, it's all nonsense, and then carry on living their lives the same old way.
You're right
For a
about
while.
well, you don't know why. That's because the averages don't, they don't penetrate people's minds. It's that what you were saying, yes, it's the West that should be consuming way less. It's not that the rest of the world shouldn't be consuming more, because, well, there are more people there surviving on way less than what the West is using. And these averages don't work out, but people have a hard time with averages. I had this discussion with somebody the other week about, they were telling me, like, so I was telling somebody that the average temperature in January has risen 1.7 something degrees over what it should have, right? And that we are already approaching the 2 degrees average, and 3 will be science fiction type of worst Hollywood
Mad Max
tragedy movie of the 90s kind of level that we can imagine. And they didn't get it. And I said to them, listen, like here in Budapest, if the level of the Danube is the depth is at 6 meters, and then we get a flash flood, it's going to cover the embankment, and that's it. We move on, right?
Yeah.
But if the average depth of the river is at 8 meters, and then we get a flash flood, the parliament is gone. You can fucking forget that building. And that's the average. And so when we get these heat waves, and when we get these flash floods, and we get the firestorms in LA, you live in the south of Spain, so you get some rather warm weather.
some wildfires, maybe, and
Yep, and also but the floods are getting worse and worse. I mean, obviously,
and
in
cold
Valencia
drops,
just a couple of
flash
months
floods.
ago took
Yeah.
out dozens of people in a village. So it is very. I think they're talking, just to go back to what you were talking about, sailing past the 1.5 and the 2 degrees. There is a communications issue here, I think, because 2 degrees, if it's 2 degrees warmer, on a summer's day, or 2 degrees cooler on a winter's day, it doesn't feel that much. I think there needs to be more education in terms of why that 2 degree as a baseline is very, very scary, as opposed to just being a mild fluctuation in the weather. I don't know that the communications have really put that across.
That's right. And I think why put up a threshold which we don't really explain to the people? So this 1.5 Celsius for most of the people, and even intelligent people, it seems to be a bogus thing. And it's not a frightening threshold. It's not a red line in people's heads. And this is the red line. And as Balázs said, the scale of it at 3 degrees, like we can point out movies for that 3 degrees and beyond. And those movies are the movies which we say, oh, that's terrible. That would never happen, but it will happen eventually. And just a personal question, Peter, as a successful director in a huge, shining industry, why dip into the muddy dogfight of climate change? What's your personal motivation as a creator and, of course, as a human being?
Where did it come from? That's interesting. I mean, it's something that developed over a period of years. I remember being on a flight, probably a flight I shouldn't have taken, going over from the UK to LA, and we flew over the Arctic and looking out the window and just being surprised at how melted it looked. That was a wake-up call, and thinking, well, this is something unusual, something that I haven't seen. And I just started, bit by bit, I became more aware reading articles. And the thing that really shocked and surprised me was that people weren't paying any attention. I would talk about it to people, and people would just brush it away. So, I don't know why, but I thought, right, I'm in an industry that is about communication, it's about storytelling. So maybe it's up to people like me to actually try and push this out. I do think there has been a rise in awareness. It is tapering off now. But compared to, say, I don't know, 15 years ago, I think people are more generally aware. But being aware and doing something is something quite different. I don't know why it is that I felt that I needed to communicate. I think because the more I discovered, the scarier it seemed. And I was surprised that people didn't, they weren't paying any attention. So I did a bit of stuff on social media, and then decided to make documentaries being the best way to get out there. I'm not sure that the film I made was entirely successful, though, because I felt people needed to be scared. And so that was the modus operandi of the film, to create a sense of let's say, a sense of urgency. Yeah. And I'm not sure in the end, I think people shut down. I think communicating about this is very, very difficult. Obviously the Al Gore documentary, I think, was very, very important. And it's, that helped introduce it. I think Greta Thunberg, I know many people don't like her, but I think she had an awful lot to do with a rise in awareness, but it seems to have stalled. And also there's a difference between reaching awareness and knowing what's going on and feeling that you can do something about it, so it's
actually
a thorny problem.
It's funny. I was just thinking, because when we met for the first time at that film festival in Croatia, which is where I saw 10 Billion, an outdoor screening.
Oh yeah, it was an outdoor screening.
Right.
Yeah, I remember
And
that.
when I was flying down there, which a flight I shouldn't have taken, but the festival did fly me down there. And as I was flying over Croatia, I was looking down, and the number of dried up riverbeds below me, and you know what? It just occurred to me now that you said the same thing, which is we both kind of took a step back, right? And as if we couldn't see the forest from the tree. And from further away, the problem somehow became more evident. And yet you would think the opposite, that if I can feel it on my own skin, that the summers are getting warmer, that my neighborhood in Los Angeles is getting rampaged by fires, then you would all of a sudden go, oh, okay, maybe I should, change things. But no, apparently you and I both had this sort of upper vision, and that's when we got it.
Yeah. I think there is something about the sense of scale maybe that makes you take it more seriously. I've read an interesting thing about the well, 2 points to make about the Los Angeles fires. Someone wrote, I can't remember who, that to begin with, climate disasters you see on social media, other people are filming them. Other people are filming their houses burning down, having to flee from floods and the rest of it. So that's how we first perceive it. But then in the not too distant future, we're going to be the ones filming it. Which reminds me a bit of that. I think was it the German priest who said first they came for the Jews. I didn't say anything because I wasn't the Jews, and they came for the gypsies. And that very famous thing. Then there was no one to when they took me, there was no one to take care about me. So I think it's a similar thing. As long as it's happening to other people, we can push it away. But then one day it's going to be knocking on our door. We've only got one planet. I mean, despite what Elon says, he wants to take us all to Mars. And all the other techno-optimist solutions like, oh yes, of course we're going to be able to build carbon capture, even though there's, I have to say, at the moment, very little proof that that's going to be useful, and those techno-optimist solutions, I think, are just another way of maintaining business as usual. And then before you know it, people are going to talk about geoengineering and spraying sulfur particles into the atmosphere and the rest of it, as it becomes increasingly urgent, will be driven to more desperate measures, But the simple thing, which is changing our economic model and changing the way that we live and the way we consume, seems to be beyond us, really.
And now that we mentioned, I think 10 billion and Los Angeles, I think it's time to get to the numbers we currently see in climate change and what do these numbers tell us about the world, us, and climate change. And so climate change is already a problem which makes damages of 16 million per hour in US dollars. When we talk about a cataclysmic event like what happened in California, we're talking about 250, 270 billion in a couple of days in damages. When we talk about the same areas like the US last year, top 3 biggest insurance payouts related to climate change top up to 175 billion. So this is huge money. On the other hand, we are trying to I don't know what kind of wash we use when we try to put victims in other categories, but the victims, the body count is still pretty low. It's 400,000 in average per year, human lives lost to climate change, directly related. But then, on the other hand, there is another research which shows that every 10th fatality in the world has something to do with pollution, which puts up the body count to 6.5 million victims to climate change per annum. So we are looking into $1 trillion in damages as a forecast for 2025 and another 6, 7, 8 million lives lost. What does that tell about us, about the world we live in? Peter, what's your take on that, on those numbers?
Without sounding very misanthropic, we are superstitious creatures who are only partially scientific. I think that's a problem. We don't believe the science enough. We don't follow what the science is telling us because it is inconvenient, and also I think you can learn a lesson. You just mentioned the Los Angeles fires. A lot of the discussion around the fires wasn't to do with climate change. It was to do with Gavin Newsom and the mayor of Los Angeles, the governor of California, problems in the fire department and the fire chief, problems with the water system, people setting fires. There were so many conspiracy theories, and it seemed like people were bending over backwards so as not to have the very real, urgent, and pressing debate, which is this is going to happen more and more. So I'm at a loss. Is it that it's too scary and we have to look away? Is it just that the time frames, we can't really operate in thinking about 50-year time frames, or I don't know. The people who know the most, that's the thing I found when I was making that documentary and working with Stephen Emmett and the people around him, they were very, very worried. And that's the thing that really transmitted it to me. And it became, in terms of mental health, it's a difficult thing to deal with. How can you process that and the rest of it, you know? And also there's a political crisis, isn't there? Because people seem to have less and less trust in their leaders. People are voting populists in. So it's not like this calm, rational, fact-based, leadership. I think leadership has, diminished in stature and quality over the years. So I don't know, help. I mean, I wish I had some answers.
It's actually escapism in leadership. It's as if, okay, so this guy is telling me it has nothing to do with climate change, which I caused. So I'd rather vote for this guy because, he's offering me an escape. The LA fires, Randy, the UCLA did a quick study, and they found that 25% of the fuel available for the fires is blamable on climate change. It wouldn't have been there. So it's not that there wouldn't have been a fire without climate change, but it would have been much smaller. And there was a guy, Timothy Inglesby, he's the co-founder of Firefighters United, and he said that, and I quote, "We surpassed human limits to stop this." And that's because Los Angeles wasn't built for this climate. But let's be real, none of our cities were built for this climate. Nothing. We are not, this is not the thing we prepared for. This is not how we as humans lived for the past couple of hundred years.
Yeah. Well, we had some certainty. I mean, obviously there were some bumps along the way. There's a mini ice age. There's, volcanoes going off and causing, very, very, very bad winters and poor summers. There've been some fluctuations in climate, but nothing at the scale that we're talking about. So what happens when all the permafrost melts? I mean, it's, as you and I have discussed, who knows what viruses are out there? Who knows how much methane is out there? There are just so many, in Donald Rumsfeld's phrase, unknown unknowns, and they're not, it's that is the thing. If the Gulf Stream suddenly stops, and who's to say that it won't stop in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years, it kicks us into a completely different world. So it's like this negative feedback loop that gets us to the point where we won't be able to control it anymore.
But you see, normally people fear the unknown, and here it's the unknown of the unknowns, and people don't seem to be afraid enough.
I think it's like the monster under the bed for toddlers. So if you don't look, then it doesn't exist. There is no monster. And I think a lot of adults are hostages to the monster under the bed. It's too scary. It's too big. It's too, I don't know, giant to comprehend even. It's something so scary and something so doomed. We are talking about apocalypse. We are talking about cataclysmic events, wiping out millions of people in the future. It's something which just cannot be the part of our lives at the moment, because we have problems with the price of eggs, the inflation, the gasoline prices in Europe, and all that. And we need to go through the bridge. And that's a saying I heard. We need to go through that bridge when we get there. But we are already marching on that bridge, and the bridge is collapsing.
Exactly.
It's pretty crazy. And as Balázs was talking in the intro, he was talking about measuring stupidity and the measure of stupidity. And that's, again, a personal question, something I experienced in my life. And I'm going to use a new phrase, a new buzzword. Were you ever green shamed? So were you ever tagged, mocked because you were doing something to mitigate the effects of climate change?
I don't know that I've done that much. I'm not sure that, making a film and sticking a few posts on social media puts me at the forefront of climate warriors. I did notice when I was screening the film, sometimes people got very, very angry. Some people just, this was the thing I found quite interesting. Some people it scared in a good way, but there's a lot of people who just felt that it was somehow wrong to have made that and not to offer people hope. And to, people, what I would say to them when because we would have quite vigorous debates after some of the screenings, is that if the house is burning down, you have to shout fire so that people get out of bed and escape the burning house. You don't whisper, you don't think, oh, they're sleeping, let's leave them. You've got to get out of the house, take the belongings that you can, like the people in the Los Angeles fires, and get out. And that's what I felt the film was doing in a way. But people don't like having someone shouting fire in their ears. Some people are very resistant to that.
It did that to me. I remember watching it up on that hilltop in open air. It was a very hot summer day, let's be real. And when we watched it, after that, all I wanted to do was, collapse and drink and figure out a way to what to do with myself. So it did work on me, but I have to add, and it's from that same study, the Oxford University Reuters Institute study, that actually, and it won't come as a surprise, but it's super easily measurable that the people who respond to it and they get and they are afraid, it always tends to be left-leaning liberal thinkers, and women, number one, men second. The further right you go and the more male you become, all of a sudden the less you respond and the less scared you get, according to these studies.
Yeah, I would add a couple of attributes, but not here and not now. Over a whiskey any time, but yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, there's a kind of cognitive dissonance, I think, that sets in, because if your worldview militates against cooperative action and believes in competition instead of cooperation, if you are a very fervent free market capitalist and you don't agree with market control, so on and so forth, then it means that your belief system, it can't accept the science. So it's much easier not to change your belief system, but to doubt the science, especially when there's been such an effective campaign run by big oil. I mean, and Enron knew how many decades ago and buried it. So that incentivizes people to believe lies. And this is something that has become more and more common, I think, throughout politics, throughout our culture as well. And it's I don't want to get all apocalyptic, but you see this happening at the end of other empires as well. If you have a look at the fall of Rome, the fall of various other civilizations, I think there are some things in common.
On that note, you brought in oil, which fossil fuel industry, actually, $7 trillion last year, expected to rise to 12 trillion by 2032. Clean energy, booming, but it's at 2 trillion. So until the numbers don't work out, and until we keep chasing this, myth of capitalism and the only way to grow is to grow, it's not going to change. And until that is the case, this belief system won't change.
One of the problems I see, and it's in the research actually, that after politicians who are a problem for people to be a credible source for climate change, climate activists are fourth on the list, that they are not credible on the topic of climate change. While we are listening to, and I don't want to name the baby here, but when you see big bandwidth climate activists promoting Stop Oil Now, that's measurable stupidity.
You just named them.
And that's measurable stupidity. We cannot stop now. The problem is that we are not building enough of the new world. We are sticking to the old habits. And of course, then there is the other girl who sails to the COP UN summit, and which is great that she was the only one who actually sailed there, because the others used their private planes. She made it even worse. Like, I think she has a direct effect on the activists not being credible. And instead of blaming people, instead of starting to stop oil, we need to think about how we can use oil to build a better world. At least that's what I think. What do you think, Peter? How can we promote climate change healthily to the people?
I think you're right. It's about transition. I mean, we have a very complex economy, a very sophisticated technology, and it's unbelievable, I think, to think that people are going to turn their backs on that and kind of go out into the fields and suddenly become hunter-gatherers. There's a very small percentage of the population who would even consider that. So we have to plan for the transition. The thing is, the more these climate effects start to impact, the more difficult that transition will be. So maybe if we had started to cut emissions when it was much easier, 20, 30 years ago, when there were less emissions, we could have altered the curve of the graph. I liken it to, let's imagine that we're all in a jumbo jet, yeah, and what you have to do is get this jet to land safely. The problem is that with the changes in weather, with the changes in climate, with floods, with fire, that's going to impact our cities. It's going to impact our industrial base and the rest of it. It's not going to be like a nice, smooth landing, And at the moment, it doesn't seem like it's going to be able to land at all. It looks like it'll just tumble out the sky. That's on my darkest moments. I have that fear, but there's, again, to quote, I think it's Deleuze. It's pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. I can't remember who said that. An Italian Marxist in the 20s. I can't remember which ones. And I think that's what you have to do. You can understand and have a world outlook that is pessimistic, but you can't give in to that pessimism. I think you owe it to yourself to try your very best to try and spread the word. And rather than, Balázs, I do understand that reaction where you just think, let's eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow we die. We have to look this future firmly in the eye and think, whatever, even if we just start doing little things, that is going to ameliorate it, And so most of the time, and I'm holding back now, even on this podcast, from saying what I really think, because I don't want to be a doom monger and I don't want to spread the doom and gloom. So I'm biting my tongue at certain points in terms of what I really think is going to happen, because I really hope that people will start to think and listen, and bit by bit we'll make these changes. And I suspect though that we're going to have to get a few more disasters under our belt before we really start taking it seriously.
Working on a time travel movie, and one of the producers told me, time travel movies are always, they're dancing on doing this balancing act, because if you make one small change in the past, it's gonna screw up the future. And I'm like, yeah, well, we could use that attitude right now, because if you will make one small change now, who knows, it might be a huge splashy effect in the future. Why not do that for climate change, right? But it's going to be very difficult to do it because, the word climate has been purged from, federal websites as of a couple of days ago. And so, it's like, a baby playing hide and seek. You cover your eyes and you're assuming they don't see you.
Let's jump back to overpopulation. And since Peter is here with us, I have a very, very harsh question and a statement to discuss with him. And just a bit of numbers where we are now. So overpopulation, we are over like 8.2 billion now human beings on Earth. 2.6 doesn't have clean drinking water. And just a side note, we still flush our toilets with clean drinking water here where we stand in Budapest, Hungary, and also irrigate our gardens with the same mostly. Almost 1 billion people live in hunger. And actually, we make enough food for even 10 billion, but we waste 40-50% of it. And some is not even harvested in the world. So I have this, and this is the statement, and this is going to be the question to both of you, actually, because I really want to hear your answers to this or your opinions about this. So I always say that, and there is proof to that nature balances like an equation, and nature always goes for life, breaks through whatever we can say any Jurassic Park quote. And so it equalizes the equation and makes harmony at the end. We, of course, we like to put concrete wherever we can. We disrupt the harmony, nature equalizes. And now we are at the status quo of today is that it equalizes in more spectacular ways. And there's a lot of things which are disrupting our attitude towards our own survival, ideology, politics, all that. So at the end of the day, it will happen. It will put the equation back to harmony, and it's just a question of body count, really. But when we are talking about this, maybe politicians and ideology is doing God's work. Like we need to be less on earth, and stupidity takes over, then a lot of humans will die, and at the end of the day, that's the good solution. So that's the harsh statement, and I'm just asking for your opinion here.
You go first so that I can think
Yeah,
of
yeah, no, this is,
I think I can think of an exit
I have
strategy
to-
while you are talking.
I have to measure my words carefully here. The thing is, nature bats last. That's what they say. And yes, things do return to an equilibrium, but you are probably talking hundreds of thousands of years before, or maybe even millions of years before the climate will return to, this relatively beneficent climate that we have at the moment. And in the meantime, that process of adjustment may send us extinct. We may not have our little niche, because we really rely on climate for growing food. I mean, outside of the climate disasters and everything, what happens when the areas of wheat, which could be grown in certain areas, and those areas shrink and shrink and shrink, then yes, obviously there'll be famine, and people will suffer because of that. It's such a long time scale you're talking about, and it's such a terrible potential death toll. Now that's something that is very difficult to look at, and there is a possibility. I mean, extinction is a possibility. It's maybe not the most likely thing. Maybe there will be a way that we manage to get through this, but on the current trajectory, it is going to be very, very difficult. I suspect that some people in Silicon Valley, like Elon Musk, why does he want to run off to Mars? I suspect that's because these people actually know in their heart of hearts that the solution is going to be, the solution is going to be easy to come.
My answer is a very simple one. It comes from a very famous dude, Joseph Stalin. The death of one person is a tragedy. The death of millions is a statistic.
You have to live, and we have to live within the system. It's very difficult to live outside of the system. Although having said that, I have a nice little spot in southern Spain, and if the forests don't burn up, maybe once civilization collapses, I have to retreat here. You're welcome to join me.
Thank you,
Thank
Peter. That's amazing, and amazing having you today.
Thanks for being here with us.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a really interesting chat. Good luck with
Thank
it.
you. Ciao, ciao. We are numbers, but at the end of the day, we are only humans on a planet. 8.2 billion of us and counting. I don't care about your money. I don't even care about your political views or your religion. I will always treat you as a human being. A human being I share a habitat with. We also share a habitat with, penguins, dolphins, elephants, crickets, and a lot of other creatures around us. We as humans think of ourselves as superior species compared to all those creatures out there. We think that we are not part of the food chain, but we are. And tell that to the ones who had a close encounter with an apex predator recently. We think that we can kill, eat, use any other species on this mud bowl of the planet as we wish. That is, of course, an illusion, and an arrogant one too. You might have heard before that when the lost whale dies, we as humans go extinct too. But it's not an urban legend. Recently, I had the privilege to see humpback whales from very close in the North Atlantic. They are truly amazing. These majestic, gentle giants were once on the brink of extinction. Now they are thriving again. Why? Because humans decided to let them be. But why the change of hearts, humans? Well, humans realized that more than 50% of the air we breathe is because of the existence of whales. Whales have a symbiotic relationship with sea algae known as phytoplankton. Through photosynthesis, phytoplankton consume carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and release oxygen as a waste product. So, what do these planktons need to thrive? Whale poo, rich in nutrients and iron, just like your morning granola. These enormous creatures give us more than they take. They fertilize our oceans and seas, accumulate carbon, and keep us breathing. So let's get back to that part when humans decided to let whales be. Well, that aged quickly, right? Whales can live happily ever after without humans, but can we live without them? So who is dependent on who? Who is superior now? Who couldn't breathe without whale poo? We are very lucky that a whale would never ask those questions. All of us 80 billion humans are cohabiting a planet with them, which they make livable for us. So next time you see a banner with the text "Save the whales," replace the whales with humans, because without them, billions of us would die in no time. We are numbers, big numbers now. We put the numbers on the board as well. Let that be the stock market, borons, or the CO2 emissions. But never forget that we are whales too. Thank you very much for being here with us today. We are endangered species. Bye.